Hello, podcast listener and soon-to-be podcast producer. You have stumbled upon an episode of JJ Meets World taped live at the Fargo Public Library in front of a whole group of people where Tucker and I teach them what it is to launch a podcast, or at least what it is to launch a podcast that's exactly like JJ Meets World, because we don't have a reference for literally any other type of podcast out there, including a fun intro where I talk about the fact that competition is good. And I think that it's good for everybody else. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of JJ Meets World. And don't forget to swing over to patreon.com and support this podcast at patreon.com/JJ Meets World.
1, 2, 3, 4. J.J. Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is! He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. J.J. has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirled as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprained. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
I love the saying steel cuts steel, because I'm a big believer in that if you're the only person in a market, you're just going to eventually get lazy.
Okay.
You just inevitably are. But if you've got competition of some kind, it's going to keep you fresh, because there's always somebody else who's spinning an idea behind you. And I think about that when I think about the JJ Meets World podcast. Now, I don't know if somebody else is doing the exact same thing that we're doing in the Fargo Moorhead community. Nobody has told me about it, and I think I keep my ear to the ground pretty decently. And someone was asking me recently, well, what if somebody else starts like the exact same podcast you did?
They should.
Exactly.
They absolutely should.
Because there's always opportunity, and the podcasting field is wide open.
Yeah, I think in the art world in general, the creativity world, where you're doing something for the sake of doing it versus necessarily purely profit-based driven like a business would do. The things that last are the things that only compete with themselves, because competing with other artists, it just doesn't make sense. It's not the same thing. You should always be competing with a prior version of yourself. And so that's one thing that we've been really good at doing is being self-critical about our show. And refocusing on it and competing with the previous shows that we've done. Even just in our format, it's from episode 1 to today has changed.
Yep. Not drastically, but we've tweaked the things that needed to be tweaked. And this podcast you're about to listen to is actually the audio we took when Tucker and I taught a little class on podcasting at the Fargo Moorhead, or at the Fargo Public Library, excuse me. You're going to hear people who took the class asking questions. You're going to hear us give a little synopsis of exactly what it is that we do, how we do it. And so if you're considering getting into podcasting, this might be a nice local resource for you to take in.
We also should give a shout out to Lori K. West over at the Fargo Public Library for hooking us up with this.
It was so awesome.
She asked us a few months ago if we'd be up for doing this, and we were at around 60 some episodes, and we're getting close to 100 now. And she's awesome. She's a previous guest on the podcast, as is her husband. And big thanks to her for setting us up with this. It was fun.
You're also going to hear a lot of suggestions for other podcasts that people listen to. One of the things that Tucker asks is, what's your name and what's a podcast that you listen to? And there's a really varied selection of podcasts. There's even individuals out there who've never listened to a podcast before,
right,
who came to take this class.
Right.
It was a lot of fun. I had a blast doing it. We had intended it for it to be just about 60 minutes, and we went longer than that because there was such a great discussion going on.
Right.
And I want to say kudos to Tucker, because he's the one who thought, well, let's record this and turn this into an episode of our own podcast, because part of our JJ Meets World effort is to go out there and to be a part of the communities that we're serving and talking about.
Right.
And so here we are directly doing that.
It's both proactive and lazy of me to do it.
It's very like, meta.
It's like, oh man, I could get another episode out of this. Oh yeah, every part of the buffalo.
I feel like if we were fired from writing for the show Black Mirror, this is maybe the episode that we'd get fired for. That being said, too, I'm bandying around the idea of doing a Bandersnatch episode.
Yeah, maybe.
Where we've got like a way where you could you choose the next chunk of it.
Right. Also,
although I did hear that those people almost went insane trying to put that together.
I wouldn't be surprised. Also, audio quality is just a little bit different. We had to raise the volume on people when they came up to the microphone, so apologies for those of you audiophiles who are used to a very consistent JJ Meets World sound. But
like the gentleman who had a very specific, very tech-savvy audio question for you.
Right. And I didn't really have an answer for him.
Yep. You'll hear it. It's in there. It's a lot of fun.
I failed that, man.
And we talked about everything, including something that I didn't intend to talk about before, but when I was talking to the group, I was like, I should mention this, which is the monetization of podcasting and the fact that, we pitch you guys Patreon every single week, patreon.com/JJMeetsWorld. And I think there's people out there who want to do a podcast to change the world. There's people out there who want to do a podcast because they have a need to create. And then I think there's also people out there who want to do a podcast because they think it might be their opportunity to get rich and famous. And all of those are splendid reasons to start a podcast, whatever it is. And so I hope that we have helped create and ignite some fun for people and that they get out there and they create some podcasts. I am going to take partial credit for every podcast that's created from that class. I will think of it the way an uncle thinks of his nephew's best friend.
Is it more like a martial arts lineage? Where
Yes.
It's like who did you study under?
Right. Yeah. Oh, my podcasting is strong. So folks, sit back, relax, and if you're interested in podcasting, get out a pen and piece of paper, or more likely, since you're listening to this on your phone or computer, you're going to use the Note pad app. Whatever. I don't care what you use. Stop getting in my face. Enjoy this episode of JJ Meets World.
JJ Meets World.
So interestingly enough, while we're doing this, we're actually recording this for our next episode of our podcast. Two birds, one stone. About a year ago, Tucker asked me if I'd like to get into podcasting, and I said, sure, that sounds like a great thing to do, because we're too lazy to edit video footage. And the audio side is much, much easier. I've been a big fan of podcasts for a long time now. My industry is radio. I'm on It Takes Two with Amy and JJ on KFGO. If you listen to that, if you don't, that's fine, unless you get one of those ratings diaries, in which case just write my name down. So what I wanted to get into was the next level of what radio is becoming. Surely media changes all the time. 100 years ago, they never thought that they would add sound to motion pictures. In fact, seeing something that was longer than 6 minutes was pretty amazing. And today, you can download literally tens of thousands of hours of content on your cell phone. So getting into the medium of podcasting was a lot of fun. The first thing we had to do was address what kind of a show do we want to make. Podcasting's great because the show can be whatever you want. I always tell people the first thing I would do is figure out what the show is going to sound like, what it's going to inspire your listeners to do. So our show is about telling interesting stories from people who you might not know have interesting stories. For example, Lori was one of our guests right there. And so I see Pam Straight here as well. There's so many people out there who have these interesting, fascinating stories from their lives, and they just need a medium to be able to tell them. That's why podcasting is so great. So on our podcast, JJ Meets World, we seek out not just people locally, but regionally and nationally who have an interesting story to tell. Some of our most downloaded episodes include one where we interview an undertaker and ask about what it's like to care for people after they've shuffled off this mortal coil. We have done an episode, our episode that aired on Monday is with a young lady who is to cosplay. And we really are covering like a huge gamut of people on there. I learn something new every single time we do one of these interviews. They last for about an hour. Sometimes they're a little bit longer than that. And we've tweaked how our episodes go depending on the feedback that we get from the people out there. So don't be afraid of some criticism while you're preparing your podcast. If someone tells you it was great, but it was maybe 10 minutes too long.
You'll get some.
Yeah, you'll get a lot of that. Yeah. People love to give a good critique. And so take that with both a grain of salt and as some advice as you're prepping your own podcast out there. So once you figure out what your podcast is going to be, whether it's going to be you just talking about politics for 5 minutes or explaining why the number 9 on McDonald's extra value meal is the best, you could probably eke 20 episodes out of that one. Start and put together a plan for your first episode. So if it's an interview, have some questions ready for the person that you're going to talk to. Most of the time, I am leading on with questions that I kind of know the answers to. I'm exploring some things. If I want someone to talk about their time in Panama, I can lead them in by saying, tell me about your time in Panama. Sometimes you're lucky, and Doug Hamilton, who's another radio personality in the Fargo-Moorhead area, hopped on, and I said, well, Doug, tell me about your life. And 20 minutes straight, he was just talk. It made my job really easy that day. So now you've got an idea for what your podcast is. Now you've got a game plan for your first episode. It's time to think, how am I going to record this? How am I going to put this together and make it available for other people to see? So I'm going to transition it over to Tucker, who's my producer on JJ Meets World. He's a co-host. He monitors our audio levels, and he's the one who makes sure that these things get out every Monday and Thursday.
We're going to go to sitting here in a little bit, but I'm going to not get shown up by JJ, and I'm going to stand up for the first part. JJ hit the nail on the head when he said we're too lazy to edit video, which means I'm too lazy to edit video at the moment. My background is in video production. I've been a TV producer for better part of 10 years. I used to work in poker television and produced a show on CBS Sports Network called Poker Night in America. And when I approached JJ about getting into podcasting, I thought that, and it turned out to be true, that if producing a poker TV show, an hour-long poker TV show, is like running an Ultraman marathon, producing a podcast is like walking your dog around the block twice. So it seems like a pretty obvious answer, right? The things that I'm kind of excited to talk about today, and we're going to kind of get through this quick because what we really want are for you to be able to ask us questions that we can answer for you. And when we get to that portion, if you could just do us a favor and walk up to one of these, either of these microphones, and just say it into that. And if we need to repeat it for the rest of the room, we can. And then you will be an official guest on JJ Meets World, which is recording right now. Podcasting, out of all of the other media types out there, is incredibly easy to access. It's really easy to get started. What we have sitting in front of us right here, I've kind of outlined in that resource sheet on the back if you want to take a look at it. This setup minus the computer cost us a little under $300 to piece together. And that's with 4 microphones and a bunch of stuff, right? You could start podcasting today using your phone for free if you really wanted to. There are plenty of apps out there on the App Store for both iOS and Google Play. Really what you need is you need a connection to the internet, a way to record your voice, and a voice. And that's it. That's the barrier to getting into podcasting. And if you think about like old-timey radio and how they had all these old radio dramas, and that was the way you told stories until they had a really visual medium to go. If you go back to listen to those stories, they're still engaging today, and they're able to take you to, Narnia or Germany or the moon or the ocean or wherever you want to go, and it costs next to nothing because it is the theater of the mind's eye that your audience is listening to. So I'm not going to try to get too bogged down into details. A lot of them I've outlined on that sheet. And please feel free to ask us questions when we get to that point, and even afterwards if you want to come up. We've also put our contact info on that sheet, so you can email JJ Meets World and ask any questions that you want. So yeah, like I said, you need the ability to record your voice, which requires a microphone. And we're using a computer, and I'll go into this setup here in a little bit, but you don't need to use a computer. You don't need to go and drop $1,000 on a MacBook Pro or anything else to really get started. On that sheet, we've got, I'm sorry, I'll get to you in just a second. There are little recorders, 2-channel recorders that you can get on Amazon for like $100, and that's more than good enough to get your recording made. Some people use their phones. Some use one single microphone that they buy online and get that.
We had a guest who recorded all of the episodes of her show which is about the Tudors dynasty and has over 30,000 followers, by throwing a blanket over her head and recording it right into her iPhone 4.
Right.
So you can do anything. You've got the technology in your pocket right now already.
Think about it this way. Think about YouTube videos. How many YouTube videos has just immaculate video quality, right? Some of the most viewed YouTube videos out there are all compressed and artifacty, and ultimately that's because it's not necessarily about the tech or the quality of the recording. It's about the content. If you have something interesting to say that people want to listen to, if you record it on your phone, they'll still listen to it. It might be kind of annoying after a while, but some very popular, like her podcast dwarfs ours. Like a ton of people listen to her podcast.
Yeah, they should have asked her to do this.
They really should have.
You know.
So you need a method to record, and then the other really big thing is you have to figure out what an RSS feed is. And now here's the thing. I'm the producer of the show, and I can never remember what RSS stands for. Some of you in the room probably know. I'm pretty sure the word syndicated is in there. It's a little term we've had around for years. RSS is the feed. It's the thing that you upload your podcast to that lets other people get from it. There are a lot of different ways that you can set up an RSS feed. I'll tell you about how we did it, and it's outlined on the sheet. We use a service called Libsyn. Libsyn.com. You can get into there for free, I believe, and then they've got tiers of payment if you're uploading a bunch of content. But basically what a service like Libsyn does, or any of the other RSS providers, is it lets it so that let's say you've got a podcast and you want people to be able to download it wherever. iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Facebook, the list goes on and on. Instead of having to upload it every single time to each one of those platforms and re-input the information every time, you do it once, and then that service feeds it out to everything. And then people can digest your content the way that they want to, which is ultimately kind of the coolest thing about podcasting, is that it's a slow medium, unlike TV, where people get to take their time with it and digest it when it works for them.
For our podcast, the coup de grace has been to get on the Apple RSS feed that feeds into things like iTunes and the Apple Radio, things like that. That's where the bulk of our listenership has come from so far.
Right. For whatever reason, I think it's because Apple was the first company to put in their software a podcast category in iTunes. First one to ever do it. And so I want to say it's close to 70 to 80% of all podcasting is downloaded on Apple devices using iOS. Like, for whatever reason, iPhone users are really into podcasting. So yeah, you find out kind of weird things like that with a service like Libsyn, which then not only services your RSS feed for you, but then gives you on the back end information, analytics. How many times has this been downloaded? Where has it been downloaded? How long are people listening to it? We did, and it graphs it over time. So we did an episode around Christmas time about the Santaland Diaries, which JJ starred in. And suddenly we realized, wow, this podcast just blew up. Like, we just got 3,000 downloads in a week. What the heck happened? And we found out it's because people were Googling for Santaland Diaries because it was December and it was being performed everywhere. So services like that give you information to go, okay, our audience responded to something that we did. And now we're looking back and going, what kind of other things can we do to get an audience to find us?
Using those ideas and those analytics too will really help you. If your sole goal is to get a bunch of people listening to your podcast and you don't really care about what the content is, find the show that had your biggest spike and then just keep replicating that over and over and over and over again. It's what a lot of major radio companies do. They find that one niche and then they say, okay, well, we're going to figure out how to just duplicate this over and over. So every time we say Lindsay Lohan, we know it's good for 500 downloads. So they'll start having a Lindsay Lohan check-in every single week to try and up those podcast numbers over and over and over again.
Let's get a little comfortable here, JJ. I want to get to know everyone that's gotten here a little bit better so that we better know what kind of information you need to hear from us. I'm so excited about podcasting that I can just run at the mouth. And I want to kind of get feedback from you guys as well before we go, especially because I know you've got a question lined up. Go ahead. Do you want to come up to one of these and just say it into the microphone? What's your name, by the way?
Hi, my name is Sherry Darden.
Nice to
Hello,
meet you,
Sherry.
Hi.
Welcome to JJ Meets World.
Thank you.
People are listening to this on all over the globe.
Hi, everybody. You have MacBook Pro 13-inch, and I was wondering, I have a HP laptop.
Yep.
So I was wondering, can I use that?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
The nice thing about audio is that it's not really processor intensive. So you don't need like the coolest, fastest computer on the planet. This is actually, I think, 4 or 5 years old. I think, something like that. But yeah, I mean, I bet anything your HP laptop would be more than equipped to handle audio production. And on that list, in the post-production software, you take a look at Audacity. That's the free software that's out there that you can download. And I think that, I could be wrong, but I think that's optimal for running on all sorts of computers.
It is, yeah. It's both PC and Mac. They've
Sweet.
got one for each.
My second question was on the podcasting hosting, the Libsyn. Does that cost?
We do pay for it's a tiered service.
Okay.
The way Libsyn does it is they charge you depending on how much of the how much space the episode takes up. So actually, think you just reminded me of something to talk about.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It really comes down to how often you're uploading and how long your show is. So we upload twice a week. And our show is at least an hour long, which puts it at about 100 or so meg each time we upload. And so because we're putting up a ton of content, we actually pay for a certain level of hosting, which I think it's about $70 a month is what we're paying right now.
Oh, that's not bad.
No, but I mean, even if you're only doing one podcast a week, that's half an hour, I bet you're not paying more than $20 to be able to use the service.
And you can use services like SoundCloud has a certain amount that you can upload for free. And so if you say to yourself, like for me, for example, when I got into home preserves, I went out and spent like $400 and I've made not a single jar of jam since. So I learned a very important lesson that maybe I'll just go the route of the cheapest or the free until I know I'm going to follow through and keep doing it over and over again.
Okay. Well, I'm here because
Could you get just a little bit closer to the mic?
my sweetie is into black powder. We're both into black powder rendezvous.
Yeah.
And we're doing the High Plains Rendezvous this year in
Cool.
Sheldon, North Dakota? South Dakota. I can't remember which one. I'm from Minnesota, so the Dakotas are confusing to me.
Yeah, they want to make them one mega Dakota if you've seen that change.org petition.
So I thought, well, maybe I could do a podcast and promote the show and promote the rendezvous and stuff. So that's why I'm here tonight, because I thought I have a Behringer. I've already bought the stuff,
Nice.
but I never had the class, the teaching to go further. So here I am.
Right. Well,
It's
we're
easy.
We're a resource
Awesome.
for you also after this. So go ahead and email us
Awesome.
anytime you want, and I'll
Okay.
respond to you
Yeah,
about
send
that.
us a copy of your first podcast.
Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you.
Just out of curiosity, who out there has an idea for a show already? Couple of people? Yeah, awesome. So I'm curious to know, what's stopping you from making that show? What has stopped you from making that show already? Time? Yeah, that's a good one. I know one thing that stopped Tucker and I was quality. We were worried that, unless we put a bunch of money into this and unless we get some big name guests and it's very polished, is the quality going to be there to get people to listen to more than one episode? And Tucker hit on a word earlier that is really important, which is content. So what you're saying, what they're hearing is more important than if the audio is scratchy or it's hollow. Everyone's, I'm sure, heard something that sounds like it was recorded inside of a mixing bowl or like in an area like a pool room at the hotel. And so people will look past that if the content is good enough. Some of the biggest podcasts that are out there, if you listen to their first couple episodes, a lot of them have very humble beginnings. And until they get the MeUndies.com money.
That Joe Rogan money.
Yeah, the Joe Rogan money. They have a problem getting there as far as like amazing equipment. I know a couple of them that started, the Nerdist Network started with a cell phone. And it was just getting access to somebody and sitting down and saying, can I have 20 minutes of your time to ask some questions and create some content? And we'll go from there. Some of my least favorite episodes of JJ Meets World are the best sounding episodes. So yeah, Tucker's laughing because that's his job. But it's about what you're gonna say. Now we talk about ours being an hour long. We put out 2 a week, so we're putting in 3 hours at least of recording time every single week, so that we have something ready to go. That's not the norm for sure. Unless even people who do this professionally, who this is their sole job, hardly put out that much stuff. So don't think that that's a benchmark that you have to get to.
Yeah, we're kind of dumb.
Yeah, a podcast could be 5 minutes long. It could be your daily thought that you have that you put onto Audacity or whatever you want to use. And sometimes people edit them, sometimes they don't. Sometimes people just go, okay, listen, this is the podcast. Today in Fargo is really cold, and when it's really cold out, I'm reminded that you can't leave lotion in your car. Boom, you hit upload, your podcast is up, and it's in the ethers. And what's amazing is 400 people will listen to it over the next year. Yeah. And you go like, what? And when you track those things, we had an episode that was really big in Israel for some reason.
Yep.
And so you don't really know where it's going to go, but that's the fun of podcasting, is it's out there. It's one of the major differences that I face in my day job and on radio is that I say something and it disappears. 2 seconds later, unless I said something really offensive to somebody, it disappears and no one ever thinks about it again. With podcasting, people can go back and listen. Episodes we recorded 1 year from now, people go back and listen to. There's a term called evergreen, which is really important in the podcast world. Evergreen means that it's something that is always accessible. So, for example, if you do a podcast episode and it's all about Christmas, that episode's still available for people to listen to in July, and they may not enjoy it as much in July as they did around the holidays. We try not to reference the date a lot of times in our podcast. So, for example, with the podcast you're talking about making, that's event based, you'll want things that lead up to the event, maybe something at the event, and then a wrap up afterwards. So, if people start listening at the very beginning, they get a whole picture of what this was. But then remember, once the event's done, all of those previous episodes, unless they've got content, evergreen content that people would find interesting even after the event, there's really no reason for them to continue listening like that. Another thing too that you should know going into podcasting is it's kind of addictive. It's a great way to tell stories. Anyone out there, just out of curiosity, anyone listen to Serial, the Serial podcast? Yeah. Oh boy, thank goodness I was driving to Chicago when I first discovered that one, because I plowed through a ton of it. Podcasting nowadays has become something where people set aside time on the day that podcast will come out to listen to particular episodes. So for Serial or other podcasts that are episodic like that, you know that every Monday somebody is looking forward to having their lunch break and being able to consume your podcast during that time. With JJ Meets World, they're really not. They're kind of meant to be able to grab wherever you are. So if you start on episode 1, that's great. If you start on episode 86, you're going to get the exact same experience, unless we mention you should check out episode 45 if you were interested in that last sentence. And that's only because we're trying to get you to listen to more episodes. And I'll talk about this real quick too, because I know Tucker's good, and I'm the corporate heavy with our podcast. Monetizing your podcast is something that people are going to think about right away too. So how can I make this a part-time job, or how can I make this a full-time job? How can I get some money for this podcast? It is possible to charge people to listen to your podcast. So just like renting a movie on iTunes, that is a way that you can approach your podcast. Now, it severely limits the number of people who are going to find you, but you can start making some money immediately off of that. Just because it charges $1.99 to listen to it on something, don't expect to get $1.99, because there's a lot of middlemen who want to take their chunk out of that as well. But the number one way that people monetize podcasts is to put it out into the world for free and then get advertisers who are going to have a little commercial at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end for it. They would really be mad at me at my work if I said this. A lot of advertisers are going for podcasts over traditional mediums.
Yeah.
They're not advertising in the paper. Companies are not looking to advertise on television or on radio. They want to be where they know somebody is listening to their ad, and they want to target very specific people. The people who are listening to JJ Meets World, we get all kinds of analytics on them. How many of them are between 18 and 25? How many of them are male or female? How many of them, if they've had to put in their income level to download a particular app? So the advertisers we can go to and say, this is who's listening to JJ Meets World. Would you please give us some money? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Most of the time they don't. But you'd be surprised, even on a local level, there are so many companies who are looking towards something like a podcast as sponsorable content because they want to be a part of this new exciting frontier that is podcasting, even though podcasting's been around for, a decade now already?
Over a
decade.
Yep.
So when you're prepping what you're doing, think about that as well. Do I want someone to ultimately buy this, or do I want someone to rent space on here later on and give us some money? That pitch is done. Okay. I'm not looking for you guys to give me money, by the way. This is free.
So I think the next thing I'd like to talk about too, and then I think pretty soon we'll start opening up the floor a bit more. And if you can't tell, we're both really excited about this topic, and we've had a lot of coffee. I want to kind of go over the strategy that we took with our podcast, and then you can decide what you would like to keep and take and not use for yourself. Both JJ and I have been working in media for a long time, and we both had full-time jobs where we'd go home at the end of the day and have no energy left to make something for ourselves. Nothing, just nothing. I was making videos all day, and I thought I was always going to be just a filmmaker, and then I'd go, do I really want to shoot more video tonight? I've been doing it all day. Do I really want to edit more video this weekend? And so as we were thinking about it, it was, what can we do on a budget that we can fit into our weekly schedules that we're not doing for someone else, that is ours, and that we can turn around a large amount of content fairly easily. And podcasting was the way we decided to go with it. And so what we do is we also wanted to release a lot of episodes right away, because we knew that if we were doing a guest-based episode or show, so convincing guests to come on the show, if you have no episodes out there in the world, it's going to be kind of tough for some people to take you seriously. So we batched about 10 episodes before we even started. We release every Monday and Thursday, so twice a week, usually about 7 in the morning. And at that moment, at 7 a.m., it goes to iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Facebook. Those are the places that we're sending to from Libsyn right now, all at the same time. And we get all the analytics back after that. And then what we do is we pick one day out of the week that we try to record, which is usually Saturday mornings, are the mornings that work best for us. And we aim to try to get 3 interviews done every Saturday. We don't always make it. Sometimes it's just 2 or 1. But we try to hit it like that so that there's only one time out of the week that we actually have to separate time for both of our schedules to mesh up that work with our busy lives. And then we try to do 3 at a time so we can get ahead of our release schedule. So that, JJ just got married a couple of months ago.
Oh, congratulations. Thank you very much.
And,
she doesn't listen.
No. She does not.
She told me she... both. She told me she gets enough of it at home.
But JJ is going to want to be able to have Saturdays open for, once they start, making a family and going on vacations.
We go to the hardware store a lot.
Right. So what we do is we try to batch our work as much as possible. Try to get it all done in one scoop so that we're not having to take time out of every single day to do it. We found the best way that we could make content regularly that fit into our lives and belongs to us. And only we get to decide what goes in it, right? There's no boss that's telling us, cut this out, put this in, have this guest on, switch to that music. We just have the freedom to do whatever we want. And with JJ Meets World, it's been pretty great because it's not just an interview show, but sometimes we just do something different. So we've done 2 episodes where we brought in members of JJ's improv troupe, the Linebenders, and we improvised a story for an hour. And then went back in and added sound effects just for fun, just to shake things up a bit. Over Christmas,
we did an episode where we did a live audio commentary to the movie The Nutty Professor.
Yeah,
that's one of our least downloaded episodes.
Over Christmas, we recorded a version of Christmas Carol and put that out. We are planning on doing some other stuff coming up pretty soon. In fact, we're going to be doing a live show in March because that's around the time that episode 100 is going to be coming out. So if there's anything that you take home with you today, it's that podcasting is, I think, the most malleable medium out there because it costs almost nothing to get into it, and you are restricted by your imagination and your willingness to just put in the time to do it. Those are the only things that are really keeping you from starting a podcast today. You can get into it without paying anything if you have a phone, if you have access to the internet, or you could spend roughly about $300 for this setup minus the computer to get into it and have a really, really good sounding show. And finally, I'll just talk a brief overview of the equipment that you see up here, which is what we use to make every episode, why we picked it, and what it's been able to do for us. So, first off, who here already has some podcast equipment at home? All right. Besides the computer, I'm assuming the most expensive thing is the microphone in your setup for the most of you, all right? These microphones are $80. These microphones are the cheapest and best sounding cheap microphones you can get for podcasts, and they're listed on that sheet. As I'm talking right now, I'm getting a really good audio recording, and if you listen to our show, it actually sounds pretty professional. The one thing about cheap mics like this is that you don't want to handle them because that introduces noise into the thing. If you can let it be suspended while you're talking, you're great. It's awesome. So we didn't have a ton of money to invest in it. You can spend $500, $600, $700, $1,000, $2,000 on microphones. The microphones they use at KFGO, those are probably $1,000 microphones, right?
I would guess so.
At the very least.
I don't get to see that kind of paperwork, but I would imagine.
Something like that, right? So you don't have to break the bank to get a really good sounding mic. I really like these. We've been using them all year long. They kick ass. And as long as you can get them on something so you're not...
This is a library, Tucker.
They kick butt.
There you go.
I forget that we're not just in our studio right now.
Yeah, I know.
We just let it fly sometimes whenever we want. And then, pretty typical XLR cables. You've probably all seen those. Those are standard. These arms, I think, were about $20. All on Amazon. Everything came from Amazon. The next thing that I've got up here is this little black box, and afterwards feel free to come up and take a closer look at it. It's a Behringer UMC something. It's on the sheet. This is a 4-input capture device, meaning I can record this episode and all 4 of these microphones are recorded separately. So if I need to, if this person on this microphone is speaking too softly or that person is speaking too loudly, I can change just them without having to change everything else. That we did that because we knew that we would have guests or multiple people in the room talking at the same time. If I had my druthers, we'd have an 8 input, but that would be, if you had 8 people in a podcast room, that'd be insane. But yeah, so they also make a 2-channel input of this as well. So you can buy a cheaper version of this that gives you separate control. But even the little audio recorder that I've listed on that sheet, they're always 2-track recorders. So you always have the ability to record each microphone separately. If you can introduce that functionality into your podcasting, that helps so much if you can isolate those separately. And then it just runs into my computer. And then the last thing that we're using is we're using Adobe Audition to record and edit. The reason we're using that is because I already have a Creative Cloud membership because I do video production and all sorts of other stuff. So I've already got this whole suite of things, but you don't need to use Audition. Audacity I've used in the past. Fantastic software. Everything you need is right there as well. And there are plenty of other. GarageBand is one that a lot of people use. So play around, see what you like, what you want to use. Yeah, and then at the end of the day, then it's our process. We go in, we record a bunch of episodes. I take the recording home. And then I do an edit where I add in our intro music and I edit out any sort of slop at the beginning or end where we're just talking, prepping the guest, get it all into space, throw a couple of filters on there, and export it and send it up to Libsyn. And that's about it. Well, this wasn't easy for me because I was doing it all for the first time. Even though I'm a video guy and have used a lot of audio, I had to kind of learn a bunch of new stuff. But if you even just go down that sheet and use the resources there, I mean, I think you'd be comfortable with a setup like this in maybe about a week's time.
There's a YouTube video for everything nowadays. If you're asking yourself, how do I make it sound like I'm a ghost? Just search Audacity, sound like a ghost, and there's somebody there like, hey, everyone, it's Tad. It's time for my weekly Audacity tutorial. And you would be just surprised at how many different things that we have found just by trial and error. Those folks out there who already own like a microphone, how many of you have a USB microphone, like plugs right into a USB port? Yeah, right? So even the companies who make these devices know that podcasting is the wave of the future, which is why they're getting rid of the middleman, which is the box that Tucker has, so that we can have four all independently. They made it so that you can immediately plug right into, your HP or your Dell or your MacBook and start recording right away with a microphone in your hand.
And these mics have that functionality as well. So these don't just have the XLR in the bottom; they have a USB. So you could get rid of all this and just go from one of these using a USB into your computer. That's all you need to do as well.
Mm-hmm. So and then just get used to, you put it to the side if you're going to burp or something like that. The logistics of just using a microphone in general are something that you're going to want to teach. If you choose to use a microphone, just teach yourself those basic skills.
Ice cream cone.
Ice cream cone versus microphone. So this is how you hold an ice cream cone, right? It's delicious. Maybe you got two flavors on top of each other. But if I'm talking like this, my voice is actually going out. It's not going into I realize I'm recording this onto our podcast. It's going to sound like garbage. You want to treat it like a microphone, which means that you are talking into the top of it. Talking into the top is going to make a big difference. When I'm talking to Tucker, if I turn and talk to Tucker like this, my voice is now not going there. So little things like that, you'd be surprised how people think, well, I'm going to talk with a real soft whisper because I'm so close to the microphone. It's so much easier to turn yourself up or turn yourself down than turn yourself up. So using a nice, kind of booming voice is going to make a big difference, and people are going to hear it on your recording. Every now and then you'll hear someone on a podcast say, get a little closer to that microphone, and they go from being over here and kind of afraid to right up to that microphone. I know that we're bordering on flu season right now, and so if that's something that worries you, just bring a bleach wipe for the little microphone hood before you look into it. It is fine to do things like a mic check, too. We have guests every single week. Some of them have never been in front of a microphone before. And so we'll start by saying, could you just talk into the microphone for a little bit? And then we can coach them while they're doing that and then show them a little bit of the playback and let them listen and say, see, you're not just really talking loud enough. If you could talk a little bit louder, that would be great. And getting that aspect together. So while we're telling you that you could just make a podcast today when you leave, remember that even things like standing into this hallway here is not going to sound nearly as good as if you're standing in a room where you're not going to have an HVAC system loud behind you, or walls that are flat surfaces actually reverb sound back at you in a really poor way. That's why when you go into recording studios, they've got that foam on the wall, and the foam usually is
and we've
kind
listed
of
it on that
pyramid-shaped.
sheet. The ones that we use are listed on that sheet as well.
Those are little things that you can do to improve it. Like I said, our friend Rebecca, who throws a blanket over her head and records her tutor's podcast, she does that because all of a sudden now that sound is trapped right next to where she is, and it's not reverbing and bouncing back at her all the time.
So I think, JJ, we've kind of run our mouths for a little bit.
We have.
I think what we should do is open things up for questions and group discussion now. And so if you have a question, feel free to just queue up to one of these. The only requirement I have is that before you ask your question, you give us your name and a podcast that you like to listen to. Because I think a lot of us here could benefit from hearing what podcasts we're all listening to.
And if you don't know one, just say JJ Meets World.
Yeah. And you'll really want to ice cream cone the microphone. like this. If you eat my ice cream cones like this, like I do.
Hi, I'm Eric, and one of my favorite podcasts is called My Brother, and Me.
My brother, and me.
Yeah, it's a comedy advice podcast with three brothers. It's very funny.
Write that one down.
And I have a couple of questions, starting with, are your guests always in the studio with you? Or do you sometimes need to work on bringing in Skype calls or another person's recording of their own side of the interview? And how does that affect your editing process? And then how do you measure success? What kind of metrics do you have access to? And what are you looking for to determine if you're on the right track?
I'll take the first part if you take
I'll
the second
take the
part.
second.
So we haven't had, we've done everything in studio so far. Our goal is to not stick to just the studio because, you know, all of our guests have been regional for the most part, except for Rich Summer from Mad Men.
Yeah, Harry Crane from Mad Men was on our podcast, and he cried on it, which is just, so good for ratings.
Proud Cobra alumni.
Excellent,
Oh,
yeah.
there
Summer.
you go.
Episode number 5. But what we want to do is we want to start being able to have guests on who are on all over the world. I mean, it seems silly to not be able to do that. We haven't started doing that yet. The studio that we're at doesn't have the best internet connection for us to really feel confident in doing that, but that's something we want to add in 2019, and we'll put some info out there once we kind of figured out what solution we want to use. But
It is pretty cut and dry, though, if you're adding a Skype line into this. Again, the YouTube tutorials, I watched one recently. Skype totally understands that they're being used to make podcasts nonstop. And so they've found a great way to kind of integrate into podcasts, whether it's Audacity, even Adobe has built-in little drivers that you can use for it that are really, really slick. And the only thing I think that you run into when I listen to something where they're interviewing somebody across a phone or Skype is that there's a little bit of lag from the question time to the answer time. And so if that's the case, I'd ask Tucker to go in and just take out some of those little blurbs there. When you look at those audio levels, you know, where they pop up like this, a breath looks like a little tiny nub. And so when I'm doing things at KFGO, you remove all the nubs out of there, so it's not like, welcome to Carpet World. It's a one-day sale. And then you can do the same thing when you just see a flat line, you know that's silence. And so if you can pop out those moments of silence, it's really, really easy. So that'd be my one thing is just, you know, make it as listener-friendly as possible.
one approach that we took too as part of our strategy as well, and this was actually mostly because I didn't want to have to do too much crazy editing, is we really don't cut much out of our podcast at all. Like for our show, we don't go in and take out the gaps because gaps are part of the flow of conversation. So if you listen to Joe Rogan or Mark Maron or Your Mom's House or all sorts of these other long-form conversational podcasts, they The Fighter and the Kid, there's a bunch. They almost never cut out those spaces because you're not trying to make a commercial in 30 seconds where you have limited time. You have all the time in the world. You really, really do. And certainly the podcasts that we like to listen to where it's long-form conversation, the pauses are part of the flow of it. So it helps in that I don't have to go in and take a bunch of edits out all the time. We basically lop off the front and the back and put it up.
Yeah, you'll
Sweet.
hear us coughing all the time
Yeah.
on it, or when someone has to leave and you hear the door slam behind us. Question number 2, how do you measure success? We've got buttons. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. But
End of question.
yeah, you know, I included a little piece here too that, you know, to me, on the little page with our logo at the top, at the bottom, I've got a little a note about how it was kind of tough when we're to episode 10 and we're getting excited because 9 people downloaded an episode, and you realize you're putting in all this time and all this effort. Well, the beauty of a podcast, and because all these episodes are available whenever, somebody found our episode because of the Santaland Diaries, they'll go back from episode 70 to episode 1 and start listening and listening and listening. We also had what we thought was a gentleman from Great Britain who is listening to our podcast and sending us $2 bills through the mail to support us, and then found out 40 episodes later we were getting punked by somebody
Who told us on our show.
who told us on air. Couldn't believe it. But one of the neat things is we raise money for our studio. So we have a studio over at Apt that the Kilborn group has. They used to be the old where you take your urinalysis test after you join the army.
Hey, this is a library, JJ.
I think urinalysis is way better than what you said. But they took all of those exam rooms and they turned them into individual studio spaces. And so we rent a very tiny little room there that's our permanent studio. And when we had people who started coming to us and telling us, like, yeah, I listened to this episode or I heard this. I was in Bismarck 2 weeks ago and someone goes, hey, I heard the episode that you did where you didn't like the show DuckTales. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, we made it. If someone knows my personal opinion about DuckTales, that is just top notch.
Talk about being offensive.
Yeah,
right.
It was the new DuckTales, the new one. I love the old one. I was really crapping on the new DuckTales. So to me, it was great. You know, we get an episode that's downloaded 3,000 times in 40 states and 30 different countries. That's awesome. But my favorite thing has been the reviews that we've had from complete and total strangers. Somebody reviewed our podcast and said, this is exactly the kind of conversations we used to have in my dorm. And I like the fact that that person felt a kinship to this podcast, and I've never talked to him personally, and he's never talked to me, but we've got this relationship now where I'm a part of his commute to work every day, or I was a part of a road trip he and his girlfriend took to Sheboygan, whatever it happens to be. I feel the same way about some of my favorite podcasts, like Stephen Tobolowsky and the Tobolowsky Files. If you guys ever saw the movie Groundhog Day, Stephen Tobolowsky is the insurance salesman who approaches him on the street. He's a character actor, just amazing. And his podcasts are all stories from his life. And so he'll spend an hour and a half in 2 separate segments talking about the animals in his house and how they're all smarter than he is, and then what it was like to work with Bill Murray in Groundhog Day. The podcast is amazing. It'll bring a tear to your eye. It'll get you laughing. It'll make you think a little bit. But I felt like I had this relationship with Stephen Tobolowsky for years. And then when I finally met him, because he came to Fargo just last year, I was like, hey, remember when you said this and you did that? Remember when you said that? And I was doing this. And he looked at me like, it was like, okay, I get this a lot. You know, you're more than a fan. You feel like we've got a relationship. So so I love getting stuff. I love getting stuff like that. That's why I feel like I'm a part of a fabric of somebody's life. And that means more to me than $1 million for Goodfellow pants, only available at Target. I'm really hoping they'll sponsor us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Dad.
This is Tucker's dad. He has not reviewed our podcast yet.
I don't know if he's listened to it yet, but that's okay.
Just the worst part about being Tucker's dad is he used to be my son. And then once he became talented, now I'm Tucker's dad. No one ever says the other way.
F yeah.
Yeah. But the one I've listened to is Stephen Tobolowsky because of you that I listened to, and it's awesome. Tell you the truth, the reason why I haven't gone to yours is I don't know how to get there because I'm such a neophyte. The only reason why I knew yours was because you showed me and you did it. So I'm here for some reason. How do I get to one is what I'm trying to figure out. And then I got 2 other questions.
So, well, first off, if you want to find JJ Meets World, you can go to jjmeetsworld.com. Another nice thing about Libsyn is that with them, you can set up a website that it populates all your episodes on as well. So if someone doesn't use iTunes and Spotify and all the other things I listed, you can just send them to your website, and it's all listed right there, and they can play it right there in their web browser. I'm
an iPhone user, and so I don't know how to do this on an Android, but iPhone actually has an app built in, so when you get a new phone, it's on there automatically. It is a purple app that says podcast. It looks kind of like a little Jesus with a halo around it. But if you open that up, you can search right in there and find podcasts. It'll also suggest podcasts based on other ones that you listen to and that you like. The podcast world relies on ratings. So when you listen to a podcast that you like, giving them a 5-star rating is not only good for them, but it also helps these apps tell you, hey, here's another piece of content that 20 other people who also rated this highly also enjoyed.
Okay, the other quick questions. is it better to have two people so that you can be watching the monitors and stuff to keep these working better? Or is it just as good if someone does it by themselves and then goes back to maybe edit it better?
It's really either or. I think it's really just what you are comfortable with.
Okay.
So if you are comfortable with talking into a microphone and watching that, then go for it. And if not, it works out for us. JJ is a force of nature compared to me. I mean, he's just got this like driving energy. So I thought, I want you to be the Joe Rogan and I'll be the Jamie who's running the computer over here. But it doesn't have to be.
But you do talk sometimes during the show, like, it's not just, you're just not doing sound.
Yep.
You're also having part of the conversation.
For the most part, I mean, I'm not really, unless someone starts hitting like a tambourine right here, I'm not really too worried about it blowing anything out.
Okay.
So.
All right. And then the last question with editing, because that's the part, you said you want to do as little as possible. For a regular show, how much time would you spend editing after the show's done?
For JJ Meets World specifically?
Yes, just for that.
I mean, technically, at least the length of the podcast, because I listen to it all the way through every time. So if a podcast is an hour long, I'm probably putting in about an hour and a half minimum on each show, but it doesn't have to be.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Can I just piggyback off the last question?
Yeah.
Yes, piggyback away.
So along with that, what are you doing during the recording process to set yourself up for as little editing after the fact as possible? What are you keeping in mind during the process, and what are you setting up beforehand?
So the question is, what are we doing in the process to record? I think the two biggest things are controlling the noise in your environment, and then doing something to the walls so to lessen that reverb. So we're in a room that's fairly small, and if I'm speaking and JJ's across the table from me, and part of my voice is going past him, bouncing off the wall and coming back and getting into his microphone as well. So any room you have, any sort of like foam or anything you can put on the walls to kind of dampen the sound a bit, to dampen that reverb, will help a lot. And you'll have to kind of experiment with what works in your room. Before we had the studio that we're in now, we were in this larger room that was so large we weren't having an issue with reverb, and we didn't have to do anything for the walls. Then the other thing is just it's just trying to record in a room that's as quiet as possible. So if you're in a room with an air conditioner running, the microphones are going to pick up the sound of the air conditioner, and that's going to be really, really hard to remove. You can do it, but I don't want to. Right? That's a pain in the butt.
Unplug your mini fridge before you start recording, and then just pop it back in afterwards.
Right.
The sound of the furnace running.
Right.
That would
Yeah.
Right.
be in the podcast.
Right. I think we're okay just because we're far enough away from it. But that's sort of the biggest thing is if you can control your environment so that you're not getting all this noise that you don't want, that lessens the amount of editing that you have to do. And you can go ahead and move that down for you. There you go.
My name is Simone, and one of the podcasts that I listen to is Wow in the World. And my question is, what are you watching on your computer when you're doing the podcast?
You want to take a look?
Yeah.
So anyone who wants to can come out back here afterwards and take a look as well. But these are the 4 tracks of each microphone. So that's JJ's microphone, mine, and then the other 2. And I'm basically just kind of looking and seeing that it's picking up my voice. And I just let it kind of watch, and that's how I know that it's recording. And it'll be kind of different depending on what setup you use. If you're not using a computer, if you're using a little recorder, you'll have probably audio levels on the recorder that will show you that you're getting a good audio level. And basically, you just want to maintain keeping an eye out for something like that so that you know you're recording well. I'm kind of doing a naughty thing and not listening this way as well. A lot of audiophiles will listen to it constantly, but we're in a setup that we don't typically have to do that. So anything you can do to kind of monitor what you're doing so that you know nothing's getting garbled, that's it. Can you tell me too in that microphone the name of that podcast again and what that podcast is about?
It's Wow in the World. It's like a podcast for kids, and it's about like different things that are wow in the world.
Okay.
Basically.
So are you thinking about getting into podcasting?
I don't know.
I think you should. It's
Maybe.
Awesome.
I guess so.
Even if you're just
I
like,
don't know.
I thought the Spider-Man movie was okay. You know? I'd listen to that podcast. I'm asking you to please make that podcast so I can listen to Thanks for your question.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hi, my name is Nick. I listen to a lot of podcasts by NPR, like Code Switch, Planet Money, that stuff. I've heard it said that, hey, let's start a podcast. Is this generation's hey, let's start a band? So I'm just looking into maybe starting a podcast in a kind of crowded market. So like talking about music or art or filmmaking. And there's already so many podcasts that are good and popular. How do you, how do you do something unique? Yeah, how do you do something unique, original, without retreading the same ground?
That's an awesome question. First and foremost, you're going to retread some of the same ground as everyone else does. When we started, Tucker said, I don't want to be just another podcast where people talk about movies the whole time.
And so we haven't done too many that are like that.
Oh, and it's so hard because it's my favorite thing in the world. So that was why we chose to interview people whose stories really aren't being shared right now. You know, the Undertaker episode that we did was interesting because it's something that a lot of people know that that's a career, but don't really know the ins and outs of it. And then to find out that, you know, he has played violin at so many of these funerals, and he creates these long-lasting relationships with people only after a loved one of theirs has died, becomes something that's really engaging. And there's not a lot of other people out there who have that particular interview. Now, you could do a whole podcast on being an Undertaker and probably find a niche audience out there. And as long as you're doing something better than the other podcast that's trying to do that same thing out there, whether that means upping the quality, researching your questions a little bit deeper, or just putting out a wider net for who you're interviewing, it can make a really big difference. I agree that everybody and their brother these days seem to have a podcast, or at least an idea for a podcast. Some of the things I do when I'm looking for content is I search on podcast pages for a particular piece of content that I'd like to listen to. And if it only returns 0, 1, 2, or 3 responses, I know, okay, this is something that maybe there's another JJ out there in the world who'd like to hear. I'm already prepping one for next December on Rankin and Bass, which are the people who did the stop motion like Rudolph movies. I only found one podcast about that, and it barely touches on the history of it. There's got to be at least one other weirdo out there whose holiday didn't begin until he watched Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer,
Right.
who would like to hear a deep dive into the history of this company. So we look for that a lot. We also have our guests bring that thing towards us. What number was Erica? What
80.
episode? Episode 80 is an interview with a woman whose profession is arranging fake flowers. And sure, that's the thing that we put in the description, but we go all over the place in that episode.
Talk about DuckTales.
That's the episode I crap on the new DuckTales. So there's a lot of great things that you can find. Ours is local in the fact that we're grabbing people from the Fargo-Moorhead area, and we will reference the Fargo-Moorhead area, but you can listen to it anywhere and get something out of it. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I think I'd like to add to that too. So finding a niche is great, but make sure that whatever you're podcasting about is something that you're passionate about. I don't think there are many podcasts out there about VCR repair, right? So yeah,
I'm writing that one down.
That's a niche. That's that's an unserved niche that you could get into. But I don't care about that. So why would I be making a podcast about that? If we do this ultimately because we love doing it and it's fun. We hope we can build a massive audience and maybe do something like this for a living one day. That'd be great. But the thing that keeps us going is that we have a passion for doing it, and that shows through. Have you ever gone to like a play or a concert or even watched a movie and you just like the performers are not having fun, and you can tell. You can tell. If you listen to a podcast where someone isn't passionate about what they're talking about, no one tunes into it. So ultimately, if you want to build an audience, and it doesn't need to be a massive audience either, picture, if you can build an audience of 100 people who download your episode, think of 100 people in a room, that's a pretty cool audience right there, right? Mm-hmm. And they'll be an ambassador for you if you're passionate about your subject and if you're consistent. So if you are saying, this is a huge thing actually, we should mention this too. We have not missed a podcast post date since we launched last April. All right, we're putting out 2 a week. There's a reason for that. our audience knows every Monday and every Thursday there will be a new episode of JJ Meets World. If you have a show and then you take a break, you're going to lose audience members really, really quick because they're going to go, they're not doing this anymore. They're going to tune out. So if you can do something passionately and consistently, you'll build an audience.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Let us know what the name of your podcast is, Nick.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, you can go ahead and adjust it again.
Hi, I'm Carrie.
Nice to meet you,
I
Carrie.
really like to listen to Thrilling Adventure Hour, which it's stories in the theme of old timey radio, like Sparks, Nevada, Marshall on Mars.
That really busts my bonnet.
Yeah, exactly.
Raspberries.
Yep. So what I'm curious about is the best way to build an audience and the sort of ramp up time that people should expect so that they don't get discouraged if, obviously it's not going to be immediately popular.
So, I mean, you could do something to make it immediately popular by staging some kind of giant, massive stunt. I don't recommend that.
But short of that.
Yeah, short of that. Podcasting is a slow build, but you need that one episode, and it's a tipping point episode. For us, I think we were about 29 episodes in before we hit in Undertaking, which is the one that we did with our Undertaker episode was the tipping point for us, where all of a sudden we were having hundreds of people download the episode, and then they went back and found previous episodes, and then that episode kind of became our ambassador and got more people talking and thinking about it as we went on. And so we just got lucky. And I think a lot of other people get lucky with their podcasts. When you think of the Serial podcast, when that first started, they didn't know it was going to be this giant, phenomenal success. They thought they were telling a true crime story of, was justice actually served? And it became something that just grabbed people. And all of a sudden, Time and Newsweek are writing articles about this and then what the follow-up is. I would hate to have something that's a massively successful podcast because then the only question you get is, what's next?
Oh, yeah, I'd hate that. That'd be awful,
It'd be
JJ.
awful. It'd be awful.
Oh, thank God we're not massively successful.
It'd be like the Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas. So for us, it's just been kind of this slow build and finding that audience and pushing it further and further out there. Also, I don't want to forget this too. So on January 1st, 2019, a massive thing happened, and tens of thousands of pieces of music and literature and movies were added to the public domain in one of the largest additions into the public domain ever. So you can find things like music recordings that are now available or books. So if your podcast is just you reading a chapter of a book, you can actually read a book in the public domain, upload it, and boom, there's your podcast. You don't have to pay royalty rights to anybody. It's free for copyright. So there's great music that you can add on. Don't think that you have to get a hold of a band and have them compose something. And find that. If you search public domain, the Duke University School of Law has the Center for the Study of the Public Domain, and they are one of the best resources out there to find out if a particular recording is in the public domain now, and that'll go light years for you to be able to add music to your podcast or adding particular clips from interviews, things like that. Of course, most of the stuff is from 1938, so be prepared for a little bit of tinniness. It's perfect for the Thrilling Adventure Hour type operation.
To also for building an audience, and I mean, we're still trying to figure out the best way for us to do it too, but it's like anything. It's like, how do you get something in front of people? Right now, we don't have a budget for advertising. So, we're on Facebook and we tag things as best as we can so that, the metadata from Google tries to pick stuff up. And Libsyn helps with that a bit. But some of our biggest spikes were when Chelsea Ewan did the story on us in the forum. And that night, massive spike. And then with every spike and it comes back down and then you retain some of that audience. So ultimately, it comes down to if you know who your audience is, then ask yourself, what do I need to do to get out in front of them? What do I need to do to get their attention? Some people just go on Reddit and post and come listen to my download there. Some people pay for advertising. One thing that helps us is that because we have a new guest on every show, every guest that we have on brings their own audience with them. So, Rich Summer, when he came on, people tuned in to our show because they wanted to hear Rich Summer, right?
Right.
And we retained a few of those people. So we're always going, who are people with new audiences to bring to us? And sometimes it's just a friend of ours and it's their friends and family. One of our most listened to downloads is our friend Phil Goodell. And that's because he went and he sent it out to every friend and family member he could think of, right? And he got it out in front of people. So
He tells an amazing story about why Neil Diamond ended his marriage. It is top notch.
Yeah. So be consistent with your content so they know it's going to be there, and then find ways that just get out in front of the people that you think will listen.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
We thought about renting a single billboard, like a digital billboard, so it would get flashed once. But like, I'm hoping that like, okay, I hope we have 27 new listeners at the end of this course.
Hello.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Haugen. It's been a while since I've listened to it, but America's Test Kitchen has always had has a really good podcast. So, I have a couple questions. My first question ties into, I think, what you kind of just brought up. So, do you recommend going out and getting as many social media handles as possible, like JJ Meets World at Twitter and Instagram, to try and get your word out there that way? To kind of, once you become huge, you can use that.
You might as well, if you're going to create it, you might as well grab it and sit on it before somebody else does, and then charge you $10,000 once you spike, and then you're ultra famous, and then you have to have the real JJ Meets World Instagram account.
Gotcha.
We have all those accounts, and actually that's one of the things that we do really poorly, is that we're good at updating our Facebook account. We haven't been good at Instagram and Twitter because we're actually kind of at capacity with the things we're doing already. But yeah, I mean, so many people find new content because of what gets shared on social media. And especially if you're on social media, that allows your audience to share your content with their followers. So if you can do it.
I'm sorry, this is an ignorant podcast question.
No such thing.
We'll give you an ignorant podcast answer, don't worry.
But do you see, the visual media, pushing its way into the podcast, like, vlogging, that sort of thing? Do you see that it, working its way and taking away from the podcast audience, or is that completely separate situations?
So, podcasting to me is something I do when I'm multitasking in some way. So when I'm commuting to work in the morning is when I like to listen to podcasts. When I'm out in the yard gardening is when I like to listen to podcasts. When I'm cleaning my office, that's when I listen to a podcast. And so I think that people want that particular just audio-based side where you don't have to necessarily watch something along with it. That being said, those people who are vlogging, those people who are adding the visual element to it are surely finding an audience. I listen to a podcast called Defunct Land, which is about rides in Disney World that they've shut down or never actually put up. And that guy started just as a podcast. Well, now he has a YouTube page where he just takes that audio and then he adds the images and some background video of what these things are. Well, I could never think about not watching those videos now when I actually get to see some of the pieces he's talking about. So I would say there's a place for it, but no one's ever going to give up on just the straight up audio. People are going to love that for a long, long time.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, I'm Claudette.
Hello, Claudette.
Hello. One of my favorite podcasts is Ear Hustle, which is recorded inside San Quentin. Because I've done a lot of work in prisons.
And he just got paroled too. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. If you're not familiar with Ear Hustle, this gentleman recorded a podcast.
Erlon Williams.
Yeah, he had a producer outside. Yeah. And then he recorded, and it's about prison life. Sometimes you'll laugh. Sometimes you'll be horrified. Sometimes you'll have a tear in your eye. And he was just paroled, and he has a full-time job now working for Ear Hustle. So he actually created his own job that caused his parole. It is honestly, it shows you the power of podcasting, because if this hadn't been a part of his life, I don't think that he would have been paroled at that time.
I don't either. Erlon Williams, but all you need to know is Ear Hustle. I have two questions for you. The foam devices that you put up to help control the bouncing noise, if you do that in your house, does it permanently damage your wall, or can you take them down?
It's really however you want to put it up. There's no special way to put it up that makes it better than any other way, just the fact that it's up. So a lot of people will just use like poster putty to put something up. What we did, because it was in a fixed space that we wanted, I took the tiles and I glued them onto cardboard, and then I nailed the cardboard to the wall. But you don't have to do that.
Okay.
It's really just whatever you want to do to put up. Some people don't even do that. Some people will drape curtain around the room because it's soft and it's wavy and it breaks up the sound. So you don't have to add something permanently to your wall to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
My second question is, I've talked about this for years with a colleague who lives in another part of the country. So I'm not interested in having interviews of people at a distance, but we're interested in being a pair working on it. And I know that for years there are two sisters that have podcasts from very different parts of the country. Can you tell me anything about equipment for that?
So there's a great podcast, first of all, that records that way called Judge John Hodgman. If anyone hasn't heard that one before, that one's pretty sweet. So John Hodgman is a comedian and writer. And his producer, I think one is in New York and the other is in LA. And they record podcasts together all the time. And his format is great because they have people call in and say, you know, my wife and I are in disagreement over how empty you should let the ketchup bottle get before it's time to replace it, right? Judge John Hodgman, can you please give us a ruling on this? And then they would have those people call in, so they could be in Kansas calling in to the producer studio in New York, and John Hodgman is out in LA. We haven't done anything like that quite yet, so I can't really recommend software. I might be misremembering the name of it. I want to say it's not Zencaster. It's something else. There's a piece of software out there that we're probably going to be using that records locally to each person's setup. So if you were the guest for my show and I wanted you to call in from New York, I would email you a link. You would click the link and you would start talking to me. Your computer would record your voice on here and send it to me automatically, and then I could sync them back up versus recording the sound of you coming through a phone on my end. So there are a lot of options out there. We just haven't used them yet, so I really can't recommend one yet.
When you do, will you do another session?
Absolutely. and again, you know, email us at JJ Meets World Podcast, and I'll get back to you with what that is. That's another beautiful thing about this, is that because it's just voice, yeah, you don't have to be in the same room. You know, you can be having full conversations. Sam Harris, the Waking Up podcast, is every episode is an interview, and he's almost never in the room with that person. They're calling from all over the world. So
You don't even have to wear pants if you don't want to with podcasting.
we usually don't, and it's weird for our guests.
Because we're in a public space all the time. Podcasting is awesome. If you enjoy podcasts, so this is like part one of the library's podcast thing they've got going on. Tuesday, January 22nd, 6:30, right here at the main library. It's like a podcast love-a-thon. You get to come and talk about your favorite podcast. You get to tell the other people about a great podcast. You know, we've had several people out here who've said, like, okay, well, how do you build up an audience? If we can convince you to tell 5 friends about our podcast, it's going to go a lot farther than us putting $100 into a Facebook ad, because that word of mouth is so strong. It is so amazing. And so this is a great opportunity for you guys. There's flyers up there. If you didn't grab one, grab it. It's you're a guest on JJ Meets World now, so technically you should go and evangelize for JJ Meets World, the podcast you were on recently.
Right. This will be on probably Monday.
Yeah, this will be next Monday.
I'd like to ask a question. Who here in the room is already producing a podcast?
Yeah.
Come back up here and tell us about your podcast, man. By the way, your beard is awesome. I'm kind of envious. I'm going to ask my girlfriend if it's cool for me to grow it that long. I think she's going to say no.
That's no.
Yeah, I wouldn't wait on that if I were you.
What was your name again?
Eric.
Eric.
Yep. And I as you might have guessed from my plug earlier, I work for Concordia in the marketing office there.
Cool.
And one of the things that we're working on is using podcasts to reach different audiences. So currently, I don't know if I'd really call it a podcast, but we're doing recorded interviews with some of our administrators as a way to get news about internal stuff out to campus. So maybe once every couple of weeks, we'll sit down with our VP of enrollment and marketing, and he'll give a brief. It's not usually so brief with him, but he'll give a summary of what's going on campus, and then we'll release it out and push it out to our internal audience. But I'm more interested in telling the stories of our alumni through podcasts, right?
Absolutely.
Reaching out to the people we know are doing really cool stuff, and letting them tell us about it.
So I think you're bringing up a really nice point and idea, is that some people like us get into podcasting for the sake of podcasting. Other people get into podcasting as sort of a brand deepening or brand broadening of their business or organization. So there are a lot of business-to-business podcasts out there where it could be like a podcast about insurance, and people who work in insurance will listen to it. And then that company that's producing that podcast gets known as an expert on insurance in their field. What you're talking about, Concordia putting these podcasts out, especially the idea of the stories of the alumni. I mean, that is...
What a recruitment tool,
Yeah,
right?
that's a recruitment tool for Concordia. I mean, that's an amazing way to go about it. And it's low cost, and it's easy to get into. So it's not just about having a show just so you can have a show like we do. I mean, you can apply podcast to all sorts of things. One of the podcasts that I listen to is about 5 minutes long, and it's a You Need a Budget podcast. I use budgeting software called You Need a Budget, and once a week, the creator of You Need a Budget, Jesse Meacham, does a 5-minute podcast where he just talks about, hey, today I'm going to talk about spending habits, or I'm going to talk about using your credit card in our software. And the reason he produces his podcast is to strengthen the value of his product. So his podcast is for free. It doesn't cost anything to get to it. And he probably gets a lot of people introduced to his software because he puts that podcast out. So that's another thing you can keep in mind. You know, like you're talking about having a podcast that sort of, you know, drives people to something or gets people focused on something. Like, that's really powerful. And I think podcasting is a great medium to do that with. So where do we find your podcast? And just go to Concordia's website, or
Become an instructor, or...
Right now, yeah, right. Right now, all we have is the internal stuff, which isn't available to the public. We
know David Winterstein, so we'll get him to just send it our way.
I'm going to call Greg Carlson up and be like, hook me up, man.
Greg's fantastic. He's actually the space we're recording in is his space.
Got it. And Greg is actually the most appeared guest on JJ Meets World. I think he's had 4 appearances so far.
Yep.
I didn't realize I was working with such a local celebrity this whole time.
Oh yeah, he's huge.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Hopefully, once we launch with our externally facing podcast, it'll be available all over the place.
Got it.
But I'll ask a leading question for you. You work with a lot of young people who are getting into the world of marketing, and are they excited about podcasts?
Yeah. I mean, even just in our office, we have a pretty young staff, and almost all of them are listening to podcasts on pretty much a daily basis. And it's a huge range, right? For myself, I primarily listen to podcasts for entertainment. I only have a couple that I go to for like news and current events, but you know, several of my friends, that's really all they listen to is a lot of news they get. That's how they know what's going on in the world.
I listen to a podcast where a guy reads a Trivial Pursuit card once a week and goes, well, you know, I think the answer to this might be Yogi Berra, but I'm not 100% sure. And he'll talk for 10 minutes about what he thinks the answers might be until he flips it over and he goes, oh, no, it's Hank Aaron. And he's got something like 150,000 weekly listeners. So it just goes to show you that whatever your idea is, trust it. Just go out there and do it. It's the doing that's the most important part. Like, go out there, create it, and get it done. Don't just sit there and talk about it and this time next year be like, hey, remember when I had that great idea for a grilled cheese podcast where I'd review grilled cheese sandwiches? Get out there and
Don't give away all of our ideas, JJ.
I know, right?
God.
Oh, man.
That's kind of like our pancakes one.
Yeah. Even like our next step is doing this live show, but we also want to do an episode that takes place only during brunch, and we also have an episode that takes place after the bar close, where we get people from the bar and bring them over to our studio, and have another late night nightcap.
We're also planning on finding out who has the best pancakes in town, so we're going to go to like 5 different places and record ourselves eating pancakes.
Yeah,
we're not going to ask for permission either.
And that's
we're just going to do it.
That's for you, the public. That's a service we are providing.
I'm going to put Lori on the spot here. If the Fargo Public Library had a regular podcast, how many of you would listen to it? I would listen to it.
Yeah, I would.
All right, so you should get on making a podcast, Lori, and also tell Dean I really want him to have a podcast, because Fargo's Record Santa needs to tell us weekly what kind of records we should be listening to. We've gone a little bit over our time, although I don't think we're getting kicked out anytime soon. But if everyone else has any questions, please come on up. and we'll do them. Come on right up here, sir. How's it going?
Fine. My name is Will.
Go talk right at the end, right there.
Hi.
There you go.
What do you think about M4B files, like for audiobooks? It's similar to iTunes files. I've noticed when you throw the iTunes ones in the trash, they turn to MP3 files.
Right.
So.
Right.
This is a question for Tucker.
Do you think they're pretty efficient, or what's the cost? What do you think of them?
I don't. M4V files is what he's asking about. Is it Apple proprietary? I'm trying to remember if it is or not. It's not Apple proprietary. Okay. It's a lossy compression format though, right?
It's an audio format that was made originally for video.
That's yeah.
To tie with video.
That's right. I don't mess with F4V because it's the industry standard is still MP3, and that's because you're dealing with voice. It's not like a layered musical where you need to make sure you keep all that information. There's not a lot of data there. So like Libsyn, it's basically MP3 uploads for the most part, and we just kind of stick to that because they're pretty universally used. Ultimately, though, I would wager that it probably doesn't matter what format you master in, because it's going to get downloaded as an MP3 by whatever system you're going through, I believe. Some iTunes stuff will go through M4V, but as far as the technical specs of it, when I listen to M4V next to MP3 next to Wave, I hear almost no difference. So maybe a more technically minded person than me could give you a better answer than that, but I'd say I wouldn't worry too much about the format that you're using at the end. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Hi, Sherry again.
Is this going to be as technical of a question?
I hope so.
Pull that microphone right up next to you. Okay. Oh, with the arm. There you go.
How's that?
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. I have a bunch of musician friends that have sent me their music on the MP3s. Is there a way I can incorporate those into my podcast? And if so, how?
As long as you have their permission.
Yeah.
Then yeah. Audacity or Audition or any of the software there.
Okay. And they teach you how to?
Yep. I mean, it's basically if it's audio, it can go in there. If it's a song that's an MP3 or it's a voice that's MP3, it's an MP3, so it can go into the software and
it's called multi-tracking. So your dialogue will be one track, and then your music will be another track, and so you can click and drag that music. You say like, okay, well, listen, I want to start with only music for the first 20 seconds, and then I want to start my audio. You'll see them kind of overlap a little bit like that, and so you can drag them apart. They really, audio nowadays, they have made so easy to be able to look at. I think, Tucker, if we had 100 microphones, they could have 100 separate tracks all recording at the same time. And then he can choose to squish it all into just one, or he can leave them at that 100 separate.
Come on up. How's it going today? Or tonight? You can go ahead and pull that back down if you want. There you go.
Good. My name is Laverne, and one of the podcasts that I listen to is The Nod. I get my podcast from Radio Public or Public Radio, whatever.
What's The Nod about?
It's two black people, a guy and a girl, and they just talk about all things black.
Okay.
And one of the things I love about it is they have this section called Is It Good for the Blacks? And so they'll have like Don Lemon. Is the new Lemon good for the blacks, or is he bad for the blacks, So then they'll go through and then they'll have a little competition, and then at the end they'll be like, good for the blacks or no, bad for the blacks.
Gotcha.
So it's just funny. So I came tonight because I don't have any ideas for podcasts, but I would like to do something with my daughter.
Oh, cool.
And the place that we have the most conversation is in the car. But I wouldn't have the first clue about how to do this.
Gotcha.
In the car.
So the car is actually a really great place to record audio because you're encapsulated in as long as the windows are up. It cuts out a lot of the sound outside of you. And actually, in the video world, it's sort of like a cheap trick. If you need to get someone saying something in the field and you don't have anywhere to go, get inside of a car and then record it in there. You could do something as simple as taking your phone and setting it on record and setting it between the two of you, if she's sitting up front with you. And you could just be having the conversation like this, and you could be picking it up.
Without a mic?
Well, using the microphone on the phone.
Oh, I see.
Using the phone as the recorder.
Okay.
If you wanted to do it with a microphone, so you'd want to get the recorder that we have listed on that sheet. That's a nice little one. Or they've got tons of them on Amazon. But they've got little handheld recorders that you just press a button and the microphones are built into it. And then you just set it between the two of you. And because you're in this car, which has got close walls, your voice is bouncing off of the windshield and off of the doors and getting into the microphone. So I'd say that's probably the easiest way to do it. I think the nice thing with your phone is that, and though I haven't used any of them yet, there are a bunch of free apps.
Voice Record Pro is the one I recommend. It's a great app. We actually use it for KFGO. It's a free app, so you don't have to pay anything for it. It actually even gives you one of those little needles, so you can see like how much your voice is coming in, and so you can know if I'm being too loud, it's in the red there. But if I'm not, it's a sweet little app. And then so when you hear someone be like, "Hey, I'm coming to you live right now from Borrowed Bucks, and it's a great time out here," gone are the days of where they bring a giant unit. They're actually just recording that with their phone like this, back and forth, and then sending it back to the studio via email. And so after you record that piece with your daughter, you can send it to yourself via email if you wanted, and then sit down at a computer and you could change and sweeten the audio if you wanted. Or you can literally just upload it right there to whatever system you'd like.
You can even take it a step further. There are apps on the store that are specifically for podcasting that you can record it and then press upload, and it just does everything else for you.
Oh, okay.
Like there are people who just, I don't want to do any editing and I don't want to have to mess with all that. I just want to record us talking and have it up immediately. There are apps for that I believe are free.
Okay.
So dig around, see what works, and then you'll have to just kind of experiment with a bit.
Yeah, get started.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my problem. I'm a procrastinator. So
Hey, so are we. We talked about podcasting for 2 years before we actually started doing it.
Right.
Also, a quick shout out. There's another podcast that's made locally called Fargo Talks Fargo. It's a couple of guys from Fargo who talk about the television show Fargo. So after an episode airs, they'll break down the episode. It is wildly entertaining.
And we had Bill Lempe on our show to talk about it.
And who else? Oh, no, we haven't had Matt Charpentier.
Matt Charpentier, we haven't had him yet, but
we will one day.
My current favorite podcast is one called Your Mom's House. It is not library appropriate humor. I'll put it that way. Husband and wife stand-up comedians Tom Segura and Christina Pajitsky.
Yep.
Pajitsky. I think they do it once a week. It's like a 2 to 3 hour podcast where they just hang out. They bring in other stand-up comedian friends and other guests. And it's the goofiest, raunchiest podcast you'll find out there. And what they do a lot of is people send in videos of just weird people. And it's both a podcast and video as well. So they have a really good show. I like them a lot.
That was another question I have as a neophyte. If I'm listening to your podcast and I get 20 minutes in and I have to do something, when I go back to listen to it again, am I able to find that spot right away, or do I have to listen again till I get there?
Almost all software saves your spot for you. So I use Overcast to listen to podcasts, and anytime I stop it, it just picks up right back where it was. So
as you guys go forward and start listening to JJ Meets World, jjmeetsworld.com, we reward our listeners by listening to all the way to the end with an Easter egg in every episode. And it's amazing how many people stop listening during the credits roll of a podcast. And so if you look at someone's podcast history, it's you've listened to 42 of 43 minutes, 42 of 43 minutes, 42 of 43 minutes, and they never actually finish the episode. They just get to the point and they go, oh, that's the credits, so I'll just move on to the next thing. So listen to the credits. They're fun. You never know what you're going to hit.
Well, I think we're going to end it today, but otherwise we're a resource for you anytime you want. Reach out to us at Facebook or Gmail, jjmeetsworld.com. You can come up here, too, and take a look at this gear. Thanks for coming, everybody. And thanks for the library for hosting us.
Yeah. January 22nd, it's Podcast Love Fest. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode of JJ Meets World and would like to help us continue to produce 2 new episodes every week, you can donate to our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/JJMeetsWorld and donate today. Even as little as $1 a month can go a long way. Visit our website at www.jjmeetsworld.com or hit up our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the sites the kids are using these days. If you'd like to stay up to date on new episodes of JJ Meets World, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcast that you love. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by checking out www.moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, go to linebenders.com and you can find direct contact info for JJ. I want competition to be fierce, but I don't want people to come up to me in the streets and try and poison me. That's happened too many times, and I'm sick and tired of it. And no, I do not want your scone, dick.